Close to 2 weeks of tough negotiations face world leaders at this year's COP28 summit that's underway in Dubai right now. The United Nations has published its first draft agreement for the meeting, with the future of fossil fuels in sharp focus. Now, among the proposals put forward are quitting coal energy as well as tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. But observers expect divisions over the language in the agreement, in particular its call for a phase down or a phase out of fossil fuels. UN Chief Antonio Guterres made a strong plea for the latter.
So allow me to have a message for fossil fuel company leaders. Your old role is rapidly aging. Do not double down on an obsolete business model. Lead the transition to renewables using the resources you have available. Make no mistake, the road to climate sustainability is also the only viable pathway to economic sustainability of your companies in the future.
World leaders have begun delivering their speeches at the summit, among them Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who proposed his country host the COP28 summit in the year 2028. Britain's King Charles urged delegates to make progress, cautioning that countries are far off track on climate goals. And he said that he hopes COP28 will turn out to be a critical turning point. The UAE has since announced the establishment of a $30 billion climate fund aimed at bridging the climate finance gap. And in what's being hailed a historic start to the COP28 talks, the forum also launched a key loss and damage fund to help poorer nations cope with the cost of climate-driven disasters.
As COP28 talks get underway, there's a strong focus on investment in renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. But for many, the holy grail of clean energy is nuclear fusion. In that process, two or more smaller atoms are combined to create far more energy than nuclear fission, which is used in nuclear power stations. And no radioactive waste is produced in the process. Giles Gibson went to meet the Italian scientists who are part of an international effort to build a nuclear fusion reactor.
What you're watching is a world record, 59 megajoules of heat energy created by nuclear fusion over 5 seconds. Researchers at the Joint European Torus or JET project in the UK made this short but giant leap forward last year. They're part of a global push to create power plants that run off this technology.
This is the main scientific objective.
Paola Battistoni is in charge of fusion energy research at INEA, the Italian government agency for new technologies. She showed me a model of the Divertor Tokamak Test Facility, or DTT, that's being built on the outskirts of Rome. A diverter will be a key part of any future nuclear fusion reactor, which will contain hydrogen gas heated to extremely high temperatures.
Such a gas would tend to expand very quickly. No? So we need to find a way to confine and to keep steadily confined this gas in a given volume. And we achieve this with the magnetic fields. Magnetic fields, they in a sense, a sort of cage which can contain the plasma in a given configuration.
The plasma inside a reactor is heated to 150 million degrees centigrade. That's 10 times hotter than the core of the sun.
In every engineer project, we always have a margin.
That's why much of the work of INEA scientists like Simonetta Turtu is focused on finding materials that can survive in such harsh conditions, such as metal alloys.
This lab is where we qualify and characterize the superconductors, which are very special material which is able to carry current and power without dissipating by Joule effect, so with no electrical resistance.
The DTT is part of a much bigger project being built in France known as ITER. Funded by more than 30 countries, ITER is set to be the world's largest tokamak or experimental reactor, the next step on the road to building an actual nuclear fusion power plant.
So the European program aims at having a demonstration reactor around the mid-century. Okay? Because we know that we know what we have, and we know what is missing, and we have a plan to study what is missing.
Right now, even to sustain fusion for just a few seconds, scientists have to put in much more energy than is produced. But they hope that one day, years and years of work will add up to a seismic shift in the way we power our world. Giles Gibson, CNA, Rome.
During the talks at COP28, we'll be hearing a lot of varied and sometimes confusing terms. For example, do you know what adaptation and mitigation mean? How about the very name of the conference, COP28? We asked CNA's Julie Yu and Jack Board to break it all down for us.
All right, hey guys, I'm Julie Yu.
And I'm Jack Board. We cover climate change and sustainability for CNA.
We want to bring you up to speed on some of the key words and terms you need to know about ahead of the United Nations COP28 summit in Dubai this year.
Let's start with that. COP28. COP stands for Conference of the Parties, and 28 refers to the number of times the summit has been held since 1995. Easy one. Others, not so much. There's a lot of jargon out there, technical language, and it's daunting and confusing, but we've got you covered.
So first off, the Paris Agreement. It's definitely part of the lingo at this point after being adopted in 2015, actually at COP21.
It's the world's first binding agreement that demands all nations contribute to the fight against climate change. It aims to limit global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably below 1.5 degrees.
Yeah, we'll be hearing a lot about it this year as nations do a global stocktake. Now, this is essentially countries revealing what they've done so far to stop global warming. It's supposed to be on the agenda at COP28.
Right. They know where they need to be, but will they get there? Because promising climate action is one thing, but how do we know how far off track or on track nations are from meeting their climate pledges?
Yeah, a new UN report says some nations are falling behind. All right, so next up, NDCs. Jack?
That's short for Nationally Determined Contributions. It's another type of scoreboard. Basically, an outline for how every country plans to play its part in the climate fight.
Yeah, because each country has different circumstances, resources, and challenges.
And they're affected in different ways. That leads us to loss and damage, a highlight of last year's climate conference and is expected to remain in focus in Dubai.
Yeah, we heard a lot about loss and damage, which means the negative impacts of climate change and extreme weather events. And that leads to loss and damage funds. This would provide financial assistance to nations particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change.
Often those are in the global south. Developing or less developed nations in Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Asia. We'll be hearing a lot about the global south and who pays for the loss and damage fund and how at COP28.
Also in our climate lexicon, we have mitigation and adaptation, both considered important responses to climate change. But adaptation is like constantly scooping out water in a boat with a leak, so basically addressing the effect but not the cause of the problem.
Mitigation, on the other hand, is more about finding the source of the leak, sealing it to stop more water from coming in, addressing the root cause of the problem, like carbon capture and storage, or CCS. It's a method of sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere or preventing it from getting there in the first place and storing it away underground or in tanks.
Yeah, CCS is considered one way the public and private sectors can control global warming and reach net zero targets. But what is net zero? Well, it refers to an overall balance between emissions produced and emissions taken out of the atmosphere, either with CCS or by planting trees, restoring nature, all that kind of stuff.
Finally, phase out versus phase down. Phase out refers to the gradual reduction of use and production of fossil fuels to zero. Phase down means to stop using something gradually or in stages.
Yeah, it's created debates between nations on the future of fossil fuels. Coal, in particular, considered the dirtiest of them all. The developing nations want time to bring in clean energy and point that developed nations, especially in the West, accelerated the climate crisis as they burned hydrocarbons to power hypergrowth.
That debate will stay front and centre at COP28. So, if you want to stay on top of the climate change space, there's a slew of other terms to get familiar with. Solar geoengineering, cryosphere, GLOFs,
IPCC, SDGs, and different types of hydrogen, brown, pink, green, and blue. It's almost a language unto itself. But don't worry, we'll make sure we keep breaking it all down for you.
Plus, show you the impact of climate change and also the actions and innovations making a difference as we cover COP28 from Dubai.
Stay tuned for more.